First off, this belongs to a longer playlist, and if nothing in here makes absolutely any sense to what I'm talking about, you probably haven't seen the first few videos. This is meant to go in order. And secondly, if you don't know how to use chromatic harmony in key, then don't bother here. I'm just being honest, don't bother with this video. So I have a course on that. I'll link it right here. I believe in being honest in the video. I mean, just tell people how it is. So, and if you don't have like those little fundamentals, and sometimes people actually still try to jump to the highest level even though they don't have those fundamentals. So basically, this is exactly as it's titled. We're resolving to another chord that wants to resolve, meaning a dissonance to dissonance, literally in this kind of terminology, basically meaning like to a seventh chord or something, not the basic triad. Because this kind of thinking, going from one dissonance, gives you all these chords that want to resolve. And there was only two basic triads in that whole scheme, but they're just all chords that always want to resolve. And this constant yearning for resolution is kind of like the bare bones of that late romantic, highly chromatic music. Again, I'm using the term dissonance lightly, so let's do one thing first. This is what you need to know in key chromatic harmony. If I want to use the fully diminished seventh of the 5 chord, for instance, this is where you need to know in key chromatic harmony. You know, that's very basic in key chromatic harmony. Now, one way you could mess with that resolution is to not resolve it. Go from one chord that wants to resolve to another chord that wants to resolve, the dominant chord. Like that. I could do it like that. Okay, so for instance, the fully diminished to the dominant 9. So first resolved to the basic triad. Now resolved to an extended chord, the dominant 9th chord. So dissonant, so we're a chord that wants to resolve to another chord that wants to resolve. This is why we study in-key chromatic harmony first. You will understand what I'm talking about there. So the fully diminished 7th chord, we talked about this a lot, can usually use any of the tones as a leading tone with 8 possible resolutions. Now we're going to take that and still resolve to the same chord, but with a flat 7, a dominant chord. So see what's going on there? A chord that wants to resolve to another chord that wants to resolve. Diminished chord wants to resolve, a dominant chord wants to resolve. So all the 4 possible major resolutions, you could actually just go straight to a dominant version of that chord. If you're treating every tone of the diminished chord as a leading tone. Chord that wants to resolve to another chord that wants to resolve. So again, what we learned in the beginning is resolved to a basic triad. And there's 8 possible, but I'm just using the major versions. Resolved. Same diminished chord, respelled. Now, unresolved to another chord that wants to be resolved, but still treating each tone of that fully diminished 7th chord as a leading tone. In other words, it could resolve upwards, but now you're introducing again that flat 7 of a major chord, which makes it dominant, turning it into another chord that wants to resolve. Just like you might do in key with chromatic harmony of a fully diminished 7th of 5, and then, like I showed you before, having that dominant flat 7 and 9. In other words, 2 chords in a row that want to resolve. So I wrote out a way we could use this. There's the fully diminished 7th, and then different inversion going to the A flat dominant 7. Okay, now we resolved. But 2 chords in a row that want to resolve. By doing that. Now what I did was extended this by using a secondary dominant, treating this as our new 1 and doing the same process. Giving us a little chain that chromatically modulates by introducing resolution by introducing a new dissonance, the 7th of the resolution of the diminished chord. So we're using a lot of secondary dominants here, okay, to get to our new key, which is another move you can add to your harmonic list of chromatic modulation. But this overall scheme has set me up to be able to continuously modulate using the same exact sequence. So we're solely focused on that small move of resolving to another chord that wants to resolve with the fully diminished seventh. So you might stick a little motif in there, like this. And I'll play through it like that. Just to give some kind of glue to it. And I'll just play throughout this modulation using that. Okay, so that's as far as we're going to go in this video. You could also use different inversions of the secondary dominant like this. Just a little change up if you want. That's up to you at that point. And I'm actually going to end it here because this is one of the key concepts of that late Romantic era of Wagneresque kind of continuous modulation. It always going to another chord that wants to resolve. It's always being thrown at you. And that's why he has that music that has that high yearning kind of sound. The listener never gets a rest before he's introduced some kind of move that's new, to where you are suddenly left in the cold again, and then he's able to continue on with this kind of music forever until near the end of the piece, and finally he starts becoming really simple and basic to finally give you a sense of finality. And the older he got, the more he delayed this till near the end of the piece. And again, if I don't use figured bass and all that, it's for a very reason, because I like to look at everything as a little teeny tiny small move, because every time I look at figured bass versions, I never actually see the small moves that he uses all the time, or somebody in that era might use all the time. I found that personally, for my personal use, that when I started to really dissect just one small move at a time, you see him kind of recurring all the time over and over again. For instance, when I was improvising on just the beginning sequence before we started showing what we were showing here, there's a dominant move he does all the time where you're on a dominant chord and you actually resolve upward a half step like a deceptive cadence in minor. So a tiny, teeny, tiny move that you dissect, and now you can use that all the time. So this is where my version of looking at this stuff might be a little bit different from other people's, because I always break things down into the smallest possible version of what it can be. And in this case, we're now resolving that fully diminished seventh to a dominant chord instead of a basic triad. Thus adding to the concept of a chord that wants to resolve the diminished seventh chord to another chord that wants to resolve the dominant chord. And also by doing such things, it could take you in all kinds of directions and help you create all kinds of harmonic sequences.